The long search for the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 has come to an end. The final deep-sea search for the plane that disappeared 4 years ago is over. A close aide to North Korea's Kim Jong-un is said to be en route to New York to try to finalize a potential meeting with Donald Trump. And Starbucks is closing 8,000 of its stores today so it can teach its staff about discrimination. We look back on the case that caused America's best-known coffee chain to start talking about race. That's all coming up here on Impact. Hello and welcome back. I'm Yalta Hakim. Our top story on Impact today, the 4-year search for the missing Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 has now formally ended. It comes after a last-ditch attempt to track down the plane found nothing. The plane disappeared on the 8th of March 2014 while flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. On board, there were 239 people, 227 passengers and 12 crew members. In January 2017, the governments of Australia, Malaysia and China announced they were suspending the official search for the plane. And today ends also the private search that the company Ocean Infinity had started at the beginning of the year. Well, I've been speaking to our transport correspondent Victoria Fritz about the search efforts. Have a listen.
There have been 2 searches, an official search that you mentioned there that was led by the Australian, the Malaysian and the Chinese governments combined. They found nothing in 120,000 square kilometres of searching. Cost over $150 million, that search, and it took 2.5 years. We did find a fragment of wing and a flapper on. It's a piece of the plane. They washed up miles away from the original search area in Reunion Island and Madagascar, and the search went quiet. Then we heard perhaps there might be some more hope when a private firm came on board and said they would be looking north of the original search area and they would be looking in a much more condensed area. 3 months later, and in fact 2 extensions later of that original contract, and then 112,000 square kilometres of searching, they have found nothing as well. Deeply upsetting for the families.
And part of the reason they haven't really been able to track it down is there are still so many different theories as to where the plane went and in which direction.
Absolutely. In the absence of answers, there will always be theories, and some of them real crackpot theories at that. I mean, what's worth restating here is that the Malaysian investigators said back in 2015 that there was no evidence of any financial mispractice, of anything in the personal, social histories of the crew or anyone on board that would suggest that there was any sort of problem here, that this was brought down by, real purpose and real design. And the Australian investigators as well saying that they thought that this was very much a case of an accident, and they've at different times during the investigation said that this idea that there was a pilot suicide involved was not true. They don't think that that's true either. In terms of lessons learnt, I mean, really this is very difficult because for the airline industry, they want to know what happened to this plane. So in terms of changing the safety rules and the regulations, they're looking at focusing on a much narrower search area if a plane should go down in future. So that's being able to have beacons and tracking devices on planes that mean that you know what happens and you can get there quickly if a plane does come down.
That was our transport correspondent Victoria Fritz. Well, as we heard, experts believe that the possibility of finding the missing MH370 flight are close to none. But this offers very little relief to the families of the 239 people who were on board. Earlier I spoke to Gilan Vatrulu, whose wife and 2 teenage children were on that plane. He said he didn't have high hopes for this latest attempt to find the wreckage. Have a listen.
It's not a surprise for me because I was never thinking that I would get the answer from that investigation team, so it's not a surprise. And the main reason, I never believed the search area was the right one, so I'm not surprised they didn't find anything because they just did a search where the plane is not. So obviously they didn't find anything and they want to close the issue. That's all they always wanted to do.
What do you think? I mean, where do you think the search should have been, and in which direction?
I don't know, but I will give you three reasons why I believe the search area is not the right one. The first reason is when a plane goes into the water, you always find a lot of debris floating. They never find any floating debris. This never happened before. So this is the first reason. So we didn't find any floating debris in that area. So why going there? The second reason is if we believe about the route of that plane, a lot of countries should have seen that plane. And I understand that the plane did switch off all its communication, but you have to understand that the military radars are made to follow the ghost planes. So they should have seen it from many countries. This is Indonesia, this is Malaysia, this is Vietnam, this is Singapore, India, and Thailand, and finally Australia. And all those countries, they said they didn't see anything. So how come they didn't see anything? Maybe it's because they really didn't see anything and the plane didn't take that road. So this is the second reason. And then the third reason is two things are saying that the plane is there. One thing is military radars from the Malaysian, and the other thing is those data from Inmarsat, okay? Mm-hmm. You have to understand that we have been asking for the proof for raw data of that radar and Inmarsat data. It was never given to us. Can you tell me why? It was never given to the French judge who is asking for it. So if you don't give the proof, it means those proof does not exist.
Have you been getting much cooperation from the authorities? Have they had an open sort of dialogue with the families?
Not at all. Which authorities do you think we have? We have absolutely nothing from the authorities.
That was Gilan Vatulu there. Well, he lost his wife and two teenage children in that MH370 disaster. And you can find much more of the BBC's coverage of this story at the usual place, bbc.com/news, including more stories like Gilan's and a timeline of events. Now to the rest of the day's news. A gunman has shot dead 2 police officers and a passerby in Belgium in what's being treated as a terrorist incident. Officials say the man carried out the attack in the eastern Belgian city of Liège, where he stabbed the officers, grabbed a gun from one of them and shot them both before opening fire on a nearby car, killing the passenger. Damien Grammaticus reports from Liège.
This is where the attack unfolded this morning here in Liège. It all began just behind me at a cafe at the crossroads here. Outside that, the attacker, armed with his knife, set upon 2 police women. He seized their guns, shot the 2 police women dead on the scene. You can see here some of the investigation teams, the police forensics teams who are here at the minute. The armed response teams have just pulled out from the area, but it's all still sealed off. The attacker also then shot the passenger in the car just near here on this boulevard, and 100 metres or so further up, the grey building behind the red tents is the school where he took the hostage and was then shot dead as he came out to confront more police outside there. Now, some of those police were injured. What we know is that the hostage that he took, a cleaner at the school, held very briefly, was not hurt, and all of the children inside that school also were unaffected because they, we understand, were ushered out of the back of the school by the teachers when they heard the initial shots going off. Now, what police have said is that they are investigating this now as an act of terrorism. The man himself was released from prison just on Monday, but he had no known terror radical links beforehand. What they're investigating, it seems, is whether he was radicalised in prison.
Damien Grammaticus there. Well, for more analysis, we're joined here in the studio by our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. Frank, good to see you. I mean, Belgium is now a name that keeps popping up. We heard about the neighbourhood of Molenbeek and now Liège.
Yes, unfortunately, Belgium got itself into the statistics a while back as being the country in Western Europe with the highest per capita percentage of jihadists who went off to join ISIS or associated jihadist groups. It's got quite a problem in the sense that it's got two different languages, a fairly disjointed police intelligence cooperation. For example, you've got French-speaking police not really speaking to the Flemish-speaking police, 6 different police forces in Brussels alone. They've come a long way from where they were 3 to 5 years ago. And I think it was a wake-up call, the various attacks that Belgium suffered itself, to the extent of the problem in districts you mentioned, such as Molenbeek and Schaerbeek, which are, in some cases, no-go zones for the police. They're not even aware of necessarily what's going on there. So they've had to improve their community policing and improve their intelligence network. Somebody once famously said that if Belgian police want to know what Belgian intelligence knows, they contact UK police, who ask UK intelligence what Belgian intelligence is telling them, which is mad, as you can imagine.
It shows the complication of the whole thing.
It's very complicated, yeah. And, of course, we don't yet know exactly what the motives were of this man. He'd been in prison. It's said that he was radicalized. He is heard to have given the takbir, Allahu Akbar, as he opened fire, meaning God is greater. It doesn't mean God is greatest or the greatest, it's God is greater. And that's usually a sign that somebody is carrying out a jihadist attack, but it's not confirmed yet, and let's not forget the mistakes that everybody made in the media over Anders Breivik, the Oslo attack, which turned out to be a far-right extremist attack.
Indeed. Frank, thanks so much for your analysis, as ever. Now to other stories making headlines here on Impact. The Hungarian government is proposing new laws targeting civil rights groups which help asylum seekers. The legislation could make printing leaflets with information for asylum seekers and offering them food or legal advice a criminal offence. It's the latest move in a 3-year campaign by the Prime Minister against migration. French President Emmanuel Macron is hosting leaders from Libya in the hope of a possible peace deal by the end of the year. The head of the UN-backed unity government in the country's west and the leader of the Libyan National Army, which dominates the east, are meeting in Paris. And the man who has become known as Spider-Man has collected his French residency card. Mahmoudou Gassama climbed up the outside of an apartment block in Paris to rescue a small boy who was dangling from a balcony. His residency card is the first step in his promised thank you from Emmanuel Macron. French citizenship is next. Now, there's been a flurry of diplomacy ahead of a possible summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Looks like the summit could be on again after all. A close aide of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is reported to be on his way to the United States. US and North Korean officials are also in Seoul and Singapore, apparently making preparations. Well, President Trump has confirmed that North Korea's former spy chief is coming to the US. Earlier, he tweeted, "We have put a great team together for our talks with North Korea. Meetings are currently taking place concerning the summit and more." Kim Yong-chol, the vice chairman of North Korea, heading now to New York. Solid response to my letter. Thank you. Well, let's speak to Soo Min Hwang from BBC's Korean service. Soo, thanks for joining us here again on the program. Just tell us a little bit more about this spy chief who's heading to New York.
He's actually a very controversial figure, especially in South Korea, because allegedly he was behind the attacks of South Korean ship back in 2010, and also he's linked to the Sony Pictures hacking in 2014. However, he remained in the top position in North Korean government, and he's been at the center, right next to Kim Jong-un, in all this huge flurry of diplomatic talks, including the Winter Pyeongchang Olympics, Kim Jong-un's meeting with Xi Jinping in China, and also meeting with the historic summit between South Korea.
As you say, quite a controversial figure, so the fact that he's allowed to travel and fly is a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal. He's actually on the sanctions list. He was on the list in 2010 and 2015 for being involved in the military provocations as well as supporting and developing the nuclear arms in North Korea. And that's one of the reasons why people think that he is flying into New York, because there is a UN base of North Korea.
And of course, again, it goes to the wider question that we talked about yesterday about whether this summit will go ahead or not. And even if it does, it'll be quite symbolic. All sides want to see this to be successful.
It looks like it's actually becoming a lot more than a symbolic meeting, this meeting between Kim Jong-un and Trump that might happen on 12th of June. This meeting is very significant because the fact that North Korea is sending one of the high officials into USA, it's the first time in 18 years actually since 2000. That probably shows that it shows a big desire from North Korean end to make this talk happen. And what will happen possibly is that they will be finalizing the summit. They will be talking about the nitty-gritties and the details of what will go on to the agreement in Singapore talks.
There's just 2 weeks left till this summit happens. What's the mood like in South Korea? What are you hearing?
There's a lot of high hopes. At the beginning of this year, when this peace talk was kind of being set in motion, there were a lot of skepticism around this and a lot of questions around the sincerity of North Korea's willingness to denuclearize. What's been happening, this is what we've seen after Trump announced that he wanted to cancel the talk. How North Korea has been responding showed that actually maybe they are really serious because they asked for South Korea's help. They eventually had a second summit between the Moon and Kim Jong-un. And now we are seeing 2 talks in Singapore and DMZ, North Korean officials having talks with American officials.
Sumin, we'll have to see how this shapes out. Thanks very much for updating us. Stay with us here on Impact. Still to come, time to talk about race. Starbucks prepares to close 8,000 of its stores across the US so it can teach its staff about race.